Hello and welcome to Noises Were Made, a music show connecting our passions in life with the important people who make it happen. Thank you so much for joining us on the second episode in this series. We're going to be looking today at two articles, one from The End of Music by Ethan Iverson and the other one from the Universal Group and how their approach to AI-generated music and everything that's been going around recently. So sit back and relax, or whatever you're doing while you listen to this podcast. We thank you so much for listening. Let's get into it. So this week's episode, I actually wanted to focus it around an article that recently came out, and it was written on thenation.com by Ethan Iverson, and the article was called The End of Music Business. Now, I don't think for a second that the music business is ending. I'd imagine Ethan doesn't think it the same. But what it is actually relating to is just a summarization of where we've come from, where we're at really. It's a nice sort of a milestone, so to speak, on what's happened in the business of music rather than the end of music as a business. And I think it's a great article for most reasons, because they've shared information, but also because it's made me think quite a lot. And the episodes I had planned originally, I've actually put to the side, because I think this is a great way for us to, I want to say start this podcast, but maybe start this conversation with all of you who are listening. So what is the end of music business? And why would it be the end of the music business? And I want you to go read the article. So if you want to have a look, I'm going to put the link to the article in any of these descriptions. So if not, go look at thenation.com, and it's called The End of Music Business. And it's by Ethan Iverson. And Ethan, you did a great job. If you do hear this, kudos to you. Very, very good. So the article itself charts the way through how we consumed music, from the early wax cylinders in 1902 through to 1955 with the vinyl disc of the 12 inches we know, then going on to tape and CD. Didn't mention mini disc, but that's okay. Didn't mention tape much, actually, in fact. But again, that's okay. Because the CD was the big jump from the quality aspect of things, which is very, very true. And then obviously at the early 2000s, you had Napster. Then YouTube came in mid-2000s, followed very, very much by Pandora, Spotify in sort of 2011. So it gives you a good idea of the milestones in terms of how we consume music and where they really sat in modern history. But what I loved was the way in which it explained to maybe someone who had never given it thought where the music companies would have made their money. So if you look back to the 1955, for example, you're making a vinyl disc. A music company would have paid for the studio time. They would have paid for the engineers. They would have paid for the production, the creation of the disc. They'd have paid for the distribution of the disc, and probably the publicity associated with the radio stations to play that music. So those big, I don't want to say the big, but those companies back in the day had a massive influence on who was listened to, where they were listened to, and the proliferation of the music. And as the reins of the media from a physical hard piece of media, essentially, right through to what we have now, streaming, that change has made such a massive impact on the power that they have. That's why we're seeing, certainly in the industry, people looking at litigation, licensing rights, ownership rights, even as far back as Prince. The ownership rights of being a performer, being the artist, and being the creator and writer don't mean anything if you're signed onto a label. They own the actual music. We've seen it more recently with Taylor Swift, and sadly, I don't think that'll be the end of these situations. And there's two sides to every coin. So the reality is these companies have put money up. They have made an investment in an artist. So it's only fair they do see a return on that. In the same way, once you do have a certain amount of money, you are able to take that fight on, as opposed to if you don't have anything and you're often what is at the time a substantial amount of money. And we mustn't forget that. Some of these artists are not paid insurmountable amounts of money. So they're looking for their creative freedom and the rights to choose if they want soundtracks in a movie, for example. We'll come on to that in a moment. So when we see the music business, I want to say as a slogan typed around, we always think of a band being signed, for example. And those costs that we mentioned before, they'd all still be in place. But let's look at the music nowadays and how it's consumed. Just like this podcast. I can record this in my home if I want to, or we've got a studio here, or we actually work with a professional studio down the road. Shout out to South Sea Sound. And in these sort of instances, if we were working for something that was going to be out on professional media that we wanted the highest grade possible, we'd go to them, we'd use the full booths, full equipment, and get it mastered by professionals. And that's what we would do. So 1955, 1965, 1975, 1985 even. You go to a studio, record some stuff, get it out there, get it distributed, and the artist will see a percentage of that payment. Fast forward to nowadays, just like a lot of people who are authoring, you can now self-publish your music. And in fact, that's not something that's new. I mean, that's been going on quite a long time. Certainly industries like R&B and hip-hop, you get a lot of independent artists who either co-create or create labels themselves, some famous, some very micro in size. Also in the punk and the rock era, you get a lot of these, what I'd call sort of micro music groups, and it'll be a selection of everyone together just to bring themselves together so that they can share resources, pool information, pool any distribution costs that they may have, etc. And that worked for quite a long time. Now you can distribute it just like we do here with something like Podbean, or you have something like DistroKid. There are platforms out there where a musician or an artist can simply create music themselves and get it out there. Now, the actual creation of the music, obviously, you need talent, first of all. You need to be able to create whatever you need to create. And obviously, that starts with you have to have a talent or a song or something to put out there. Then you have to get it recorded. So right now, we've got our own little sort of mini podcast studio here in the studios. And we've got our own sort of booth set up with professional mics, soundproofing, etc. But it's not perfect. So you have to have a song or a talent that you're sharing that is of a reasonable quality to get out there these days, because there's a lot out there. And as we said, and the article mentions, there's a huge legacy of music now that is out there from all around the world. And invariably, you couldn't listen to all of it in many, many lifetimes. So you're already competing with something that's good quality out there. So you do want to put something out there, if you are an artist or musician, that is of a decent standard. And we're lucky in many ways these days that by the power of a decent audio interface, decent microphones, decent recording equipment, you can do a pretty good job yourselves. Ideally, you have a decent acoustic environment to record in. We've created one here in the studio. But if we wanted to do something for the highest, cinema quality audio overdubs, we would go to our partners down South Sea Sound, and they've got specific audio booths set up, and they actually do professional mastering, because we don't do that here. We do a pretty good job, and in terms of a podcast and what we need to do here, absolutely fine. But we can't professionally master something because we don't have the years of experience that something like a studio would have. So once you've got that and you've got your product, getting it out there in this world is fairly straightforward. Just as the same as you're listening to me now. You might be on your Apple, you might be on an Android device, you might be listening on your Alexa or through your car via something else, however you're streaming it. Castbox, you name it. This is very, very easy to do and get it distributed out there. And there are costs, but they're not insurmountable. Where would a record company sit? What would they provide to us? Well, in terms of the distribution and obviously legal aspects, they might be able to help a few bits on that and seamlessly add us to certain lists and maybe put some weight behind certain things. Sure, I can appreciate they would do that. But I think the real exposure for certainly an artist would come in the touring, the management of the merchandise, and essentially that artist or band as a package. So that's really what the music business has always been. So in the same way that the end of the music business in that article, they are correct, it's merely the end of the old music business, which in fairness ended mid-2000s maybe, probably by the death of the album. And for those of you who looking at the timelines of music, around 2000 was when Napster came out, 99 to 2001. That was around the time of Napster. You also had your iPods. And when Steve Jobs famously came out and said, you can buy one track for $1, that fundamentally changed music in a gigantic way, and arguably the consumption of any media going forward. Because not only did you not have to own the physical media, you could download it. You could just buy one song. You didn't have to buy the whole album. So for artists who spent a long time cultivating that album, so the album was a story, a time in their life, or a specific tour, people could just simply go in and just select specific songs that they liked from that, and maybe missed out on the whole message of what that album was. But the other things they missed out on are things like the artwork. Sure, they got an album cover, but they didn't get the little bit inside, the little booklet that you used to thumb through, see all the band pictures and lyrics as well. And you didn't get any of that. So that got lost, which is a real shame. And now certainly vinyls have made a bit of a comeback in the last 5 or 6 years. I've certainly bought a few. I was lucky enough to get another record player recently to play those vinyls on, because I had the vinyl without the player. And the artwork there, and there's something tangible, like having something organic in your hand, that it's warmer, and there's a bit more of a connection to it. And that as humans, I think that's really important. I think that's what we are like. We like the romance of things. I think it's a theme I'll probably come back to quite a lot in this podcast, but I think humans are romantic by nature. We see the lovely things in life, and we want to associate it to a good feeling or a good vibe and a positivity, and we always look for stuff in that, which obviously is amazing. But I think music just has this universe. It's a language. It's just universally, you could put a good track on and people will sit there and nod their head or tap their feet. And if it's a good song, or if it's a moving song, or it's a vibrant song or an energetic song, people just pick up on that. You don't need any words. I'm not not advertising just solely listening to instrumental music or anything like that, but music is a language in its own format. Just as it is. So, looking at this article then, and again, I encourage you, go read the article, because it just will make you think of some streaming aspects by raising the profile of vinyl and how it's made a big comeback over the last 4 or 5 years. 43.5 million LPs were sold in America last year, apparently. I mean, that's going some, and especially when you're having artists make special releases on vinyl and people requesting vinyl, there's definitely something in that market and the consumption in that way. Now, vinyl itself is ultimately flawed in sound production way, but in the way in which it works. But there's a warmth to it. which cannot be, people would say organic and warm and etc. They use all those lovely words, those comforting words. But there is something about vinyl and listening to music on vinyl that is not the same as a very clean, high-end digital FLAC or some basic lossless CD quality. There's something in it that you can't. Maybe the difference between listening to something live and then listen to the same music through your headphones. Again, it's the same song, but it's not. The way in which it's done, the way in which it comes to you. I mean, the article itself has areas that it does miss out on. And I think it would be remiss if I didn't mention those. We didn't mention tape very much. I'm a child of the 80s and 90s, and tape was the thing. You had a Walkman. That was the advent of mobile music. And that made music, I think that's something that needs to be highlighted, because that was the original playlist, the tape. You could share it with friends. You could lend your tape to friends. People could hear things, copy things. If you had a beambox with 2 tape players, you could make a recording of your friend's tape. And that is something that fundamentally changed everyone realizing that they could all get Michael Jackson's album, and one person would get the album and then they'd all record it. That's what happened. Whereas now it's very much everyone goes and buys the one song and share it. So is there a benefit for an artist to make an album anymore, or could they just make 2 or 3 singles and EPs? Arguably, if you were an artist and you've got a big back catalogue, someone like the Rolling Stones, for example, they make new music because they love making music. But when you go to their gig, what music do you want to see? Do you want to see their brand new music they've just put out? Or do you want to see the music they've done for the last 50 years? It is 50 years now. So, which one do you want to go and see? I believe it was Prince, but please don't quote me on it, as saying, when asked why they don't play their hits at the show, he said, go buy my CD if you want to hear that song. Like, this is my new stuff. And, in his own way, of course. But as has a massive point, if you're an artist and you're touring, you want to be pushing out your new music and keep people buying into your brand, make it a sustainable brand effectively. So it does become a marketing exercise, which brings us back to the music business. It is a business. It is a brand. It is a marketing exercise. It is a representation. So it's a really, really interesting article, and I absolutely would love to hear from everyone what their thoughts are on this. If you're a band at the moment, would you sign with a big record label? And if you would, why would you? Obviously, if they gave you loads of money, but how much is loads of money? And could you not do it yourself? Or would you not want to do it yourself? Is being in a music label, is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Is it restrictive? Does it make you feel safer, which means your music might be less driven? Do you need to be hungrier when your music? Do you need to be touring loads? Do you need to be internationally touring, locally touring? There's so many questions that come out just from this article, all stemming from the fact that we invariably get music delivered to us in such an easy format now. It's truly difficult to understand how musicians can get paid what their worth is. And I think that's, I won't say the one line really that summarizes this is how do musicians maintain getting paid? So if you've got any ideas, let us know. Quite frankly, I'm sure there's plenty of musicians out there, and if you do stumble on this, fantastic. Let us know. And it doesn't matter if this is 5 years from now, or whatever, we still want to hear about this. I don't think this conversation is going away. I think it's a really, really interesting conversation, purely because they've lit the torch paper, thrown it out there, and it really, really starts up conversation. I'm just looking at this now and thinking of the next 2 or 3 shows where we're going to probably expand on this, actually. Take on the type of media that you had. What was actually the best media? What was the best way in which you consumed music? Or what is the best way to consume music now going forward? Just as an example. I think there is so much that a listener doesn't get to see or appreciate in terms of from cradle to grave on not only music production, but distribution and all of the little T's and C's and contracts and legalities. We don't know any of that stuff. We don't get to see any of that stuff. So I can only imagine the licensing and the headaches and the challenges legally that you must have with putting media out there at that level. So if anyone works in that part of the industry, we'd love to hear from you, because I'm sure there's some interesting stories and loopholes to tell. But in the short term, I think the music industry needs to adapt. And the main area for that adaptation comes around the streaming, because the physical media for CDs or vinyl, etc., maybe only plays a very small part in remuneration. Lots have had to try and rely on touring up until now, and the streaming, it's not so much. So I believe fundamentally the main change is going to come around streaming and how we consume media. We, as consumers, don't like anything that was free and is now put behind a paywall. So things such as YouTube and Spotify, where they have free platforms, Amazon Music as well, they all have allowed us to get comfortable with the idea that you can have this for free, and music and other forms of media can be free for you. So they have hurt the industry in those respects, and having things behind paywalls definitely helps it, even if they're minimal. We've seen what services can provide when they are only nominal fees, but it means that you are buying into an ecosystem, and as a result you're buying into something that will pay for the media that you are listening to. I think fundamentally the area that needs to change is the way in which we remunerate artists and everyone in the chain of music, because as we mentioned previously, you have the studios. That's where you make the music. You might be recording something at home, but it will need mastering. It might need reamping or editing, for example. You need to go to a studio for that. They need to get paid. So the artist would usually pay for that up front. Then you've got to find a way to distribute it. Again, there's areas for that. Then you've got to look at marketing yourself. There might be agencies that can help you there. Then you've got to look at, where do I do promotion for tours and etc. There might be other agencies for that, or they might all coexist. There's a lot of legwork to do, and the actual music itself plays quite a smaller percentage of the time to actually record and put the album out there, compared to making sure anyone hears it and everyone does something with it. Rightly or wrongly, that has created a lowering in many respects of the value to that music. Now, we know music isn't free. We know it costs money to record something in a studio, to distribute it, to get marketing together, to go out live perform it, to buy even the instruments or do the training. And like everything in life, if you see someone who's really good at something, what you're actually really seeing is the thousands and thousands of hours that they've been practicing at it just to make it look super easy, or to perform at a very, very high level. And we can't ever forget that or belittle that by our expectations of free music, etc. So things such as the free packages for Spotify's, Amazon's, etc., even with YouTube to a certain extent, I think there may be areas where putting things behind paywalls, certainly for music, would be beneficial. Sure, advertising plays a part, and as long as the big platforms get their money, then they're quite happy either way. Are you happy to listen to music for free, but you've got to listen to some adverts? Sure, okay, there's a payoff there. We can all accept that ideally everyone wins. But in that instance, you're talking about something where the artist or the person distributing gets the money from the advert. That's fine. But that should be a consistent thing. And there isn't really a universal way, or I don't think there's anyone who particularly is doing that where it's nicely leveraged to the people who put the time in. But if this is artist controlled, they've paid for the studio time, they've paid for the distribution, so they should get most of the money. The streaming platforms should have a much lower percentage, because if they're doing their job properly, they're creating the area to promote, and that area to promote ultimately is a volume sale. For each track on Spotify, I'm sure there will be metrics out there, depending on how new or old, easily listening, blues or jazz or classical or hip hop or reggae, whatever it may be that you're listening to. I'm sure there are different metrics with different pay scales and different paywalls. And it's a very, very complicated system. So I'm not trying to make light of how difficult it would be. But I think truthfully, people don't have a grasp on how they can get paid. When someone can get 1,000 streams or 1,000 listens from people for a song, and they would be paid more money than if someone bought that single on Bandcamp. You know, that's something's not quite right there. One person to physically own a copy for it pays the same amount of money as 1,000 people, or maybe 2,000 people listening to it. And then they'll listen to it once, maybe not listen to it again. The music industry is certainly far from dead. It's just merely the mechanism for which anyone's getting paid now has changed quite radically. There aren't as many bars that hold live music. There aren't as many people who pay for live music. There aren't as many people who buy tickets or can afford tickets because they're too expensive. There's not many people buying physical media. There's lots of people streaming media at significantly subsidized or free prices. Once you have crafted it and you use a great studio, there's no reason why you can't distribute it yourself, get it onto the playlists, and put a lot of time into marketing it, speak to an agent, speak to professionals who can raise that profile, get some airplay, and set your own tours up. So if you like a band or a particular artist, I recommend going onto their website or going onto their musical feeds and looking through and seeing if there is a particular way in which they guide you to, get their music, whether it's buy my music on my site directly, perhaps it'll be through something like Bandcamp, which has become more and more popular, certainly with independent artists. SoundCloud's another one as well. There are lots of ways in which you can support artists who are climbing up and through the ranks directly. And that means still listen to them on these Spotifys, still listen to them on YouTube, etc. But to get money to them, to sustain what they're doing, you may need to look at other areas, such as they might have Patreon pages, they might have subscriptions elsewhere that you can sign up with to help support that artist. And if you think of buying an album, say once a year, for your favourite artist. Might cost you $10, $15, £10, £15. Something where you are Patreon to them and you subscribe for £2 a month. It's not far off the same thing. And with enough subscribers for them doing that sort of thing, it can mean they can actually have a livelihood. So that's how we see things going, is that there's a multifaceted approach for artists, which they've been doing for many years, but the control is very much more on the artist now, which is great to see. So that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode, and I hope you leave us a comment, leave us a DM, subscribe, follow us on Instagram, check out the website, noisesasemade.com. We'd love to hear from you. We want to hear your views on this topic, and we want to hear from you if you want to come on, be interviewed. So for wherever you are and whenever you're listening, thank you so much. Have a great day. Take care. Bye for now.